This episode, choosing a water heater. In this episode, the Handyman Pros have a discussion about water heaters. Welcome to the Handyman Pros radio show. Home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros radio show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation on your home maintenance and repair. This edition is entitled, A Discussion About Water Heaters. To help me explain, I'm here with my ever-cheerful co-host and old buddy John. John, what has been going on this week?
Hey, Larry. Well, so this week, I was actually over at a customer, and I was replacing a bunch of trim around the window. I told you about this and all the gory details, and we'll talk about this at some other point. But that was most of the things I was doing. But I did notice one thing that while I was outside is that it was getting kind of chilly out. And, the days are starting to change, at least, I'm sure everywhere, right? And so, as I said earlier, I came home and made sure that our furnaces were on and all that kind of thing. But I was also downstairs, looking at I just had to get a new water heater myself. I got one. And I was just making sure that thing was, I was looking around it, because the last one I had, I looked around it and it was leaking.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, that's how I knew, game's up, man.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into our show this week. So we got a note from Paul Gizzi. Paul is the moderator at the Choose FI DIY group, and Paul said, "Hey guys, really love the show and appreciate the knowledge you share. I'd be interested to hear a show on hot water heaters. Looking to replace mine and not sure if I should stay with the original gas or upgrade to tankless. Love to hear you talk through the pros and cons. Thanks." So I thought it's really a good one because we haven't really talked about hot water heaters yet. So. And you just did yours, and I actually have one that I'm going to have to do in one of the rental houses actually. So it's kind of good timing. So why not?
Yeah, exactly. And you really want to be careful with those things. There's a lot of horror stories out there on these things. Now, I really had pushed this one like I push all the rest of my stuff here for a long time.
What, John? Come on. It was made in the Carter administration. Let's go. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually had to build a manual fire under it, But it was one of those things I got to looking at, and I don't know why I had looked at it that one time, I'll never forget, and I saw a little bit of moisture underneath the tank, and I knew exactly, this thing is about to go. And all I could think of is, as soon as if that thing burst open, I would have had 50 gallons of water in my basement, plus probably 6 gallons a minute streaming out of there, in addition to that. So I would have been quite surprised as I opened up the basement door and looked down there and everything is floating around and pouring out the back door,
Yeah. So So one of the ways. So what are the ways to tell if you need a new hot water heater? Well, you just talked about one, and and that is you actually see a small leak coming out of your hot water heater. One of the things that I always do. So like when I'm thinking about a hot water heater, we're thinking about age, basically, right?
No, exactly, and that's probably the easiest way to think about it, because unless you're really trained to look at things, and if it's getting yellow, if it's a gas one and it's starting to get yellow, where the gas is, there's all kinds of little things, but you're exactly right. It's more, the age thing. If I was going to let anybody try to gauge where they were, if they need one or not.
What's a life expectancy, John?
They're probably a tank water heater is probably good for, they will tell you probably 12 to 14 years, somewhere around there, 10 to 14.
Yeah, 10 to, and the National Association of Home Builders does publish out, there's a thing, we'll publish it on the website one of these days, but there's about a 75-page report. If you're ever really looking for some light reading on all of the how long everything lasts in your home, and they do talk about water heaters, and they generally talk 12 to 15 years as a general rule of thumb. Now, that's might be a little dated at this point, but I bet it's pretty close to being on. So, yeah, about 12 to 15 years. So as your water heater gets to be about 12 to 15 years old, you need to be, as we talk about it, we're planners, so we try to, we want to be able to plan for that, because the last thing you want, to John's point, right, is to have that water heater break open, and they will break open. They can. It's not doesn't happen all the time, but they'll break open, and you'll dump all the water on the floor, and then the pipe, of course, the plumbing system wants to refill it, and you have a flood. You literally have a flood. So that's not what we're trying to do here, right, John? We talk about maintenance and all that kind of stuff in advance. So speaking of maintenance on it, is there anything that you should do, say, once a year, John, to your water heater?
So they recommend this. They recommend that you drain it. Now, if you've got a tank, if you've got a water tank, you'll see at the bottom, it's got like a spigot that looks like a hose, and that's exactly what it is. You can attach a garden hose on it, run the garden hose out somewhere, and empty the tank out. And there's, not to go through all the process and everything to do it, but the main point here is that they want you to do it, or they recommend that you do it at least once a year, maybe even more often if you've got, really bad water.
Right.
But, as you and I had talked about, nobody does it. And even they'll tell, the experts will tell you, nobody does it. Now, what happens is, it gets full of sludge and garbage and inside there, and it really starts to affect the efficiency of the unit
of your hot water heater. Yeah. So a couple of things there that I just want to clarify. Number one, when we talk about we are talking about the water heater manufacturers are the ones that recommend that you drain your tank out once a year. And then the other point that John's bringing up that I think is really important that we need to have a bit of a discussion about is know your water system, right? So we don't want to get into a long diatribe on the water systems, but folks, if you're out there and you have a well, you have a very different type of water system than municipalities. And even amongst municipalities, you have different grades of water that come through a municipality. Is that correct, John? I mean, do you agree with that as a general statement?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So I'll get into this later because I have a story about a client of mine that actually had to replace his tankless hot water heater, which we're going to talk about in a minute, folks. So just stay tight. But he had the water coming into his house was through pipes that were installed in probably the early 70s, and he had other issues with all of his plumbing, not just his hot water tank, but it had to do with the amount of rust and scale that was in his water that was coming through the water system from the municipality that he lives in. And this is something about, John, you and I talked about it. We were talking about that your parents' house was in Chicago, and they ended up on city water, and it smelled like what? It smelled like sulfur, right?
We had a well.
Oh, you had a well.
I'll correct you. We had a well. And well water in any place I've ever gone is filled with minerals.
It's hard.
And
it's called hard
and
water.
it is hard, and it can really stink.
Yeah.
And that was the big battle up where we lived was trying to change over to city water, and that's probably for another show and all that, what goes on around there and what you have to look out as a homeowner for in those locations where they're trying to get you over to a city water.
Right.
But but that was the big knock, on the well. It would destroy everything. I mean, basically, what your point is, Larry, is that that water can really destroy things within the house. That's your toilets. That's your faucets. Certainly, and we're talking about hot water heaters here, where it gets into the water heater, and then it really starts to collect and settles down on the bottom.
Yeah.
And you really lose the efficiency of the tank, plus actually the capacity. I mean, it really just starts to build up.
Right. And water quality is not limited just to well water. So you can have hard water coming through the municipal system as well.
That's right.
It all depends
right.
on where they draw their water from, and it's very, very local. So in different areas of the world and or country, whatever, however you want to look at it, different areas, even amongst areas, you can have different water qualities, and they have these different things. And the situation is with a hot water heater, because you're heating it, you're literally partially boiling part of it off, and if you have a lot of mineral deposits in there, it'll collect in the hot water tank. So too, just to give people an idea, a hot water tank basically turns into a giant settling tank, right, John? And what is when I say a settling tank, explain that to people. What does that mean?
Well, like you were just talking about, you've got all this sediment that's coming through there. And you explained it very well. I mean, when you heat up water, you're going to start to separate things out of there. And where's it all going to go? It's all going to fall to the bottom.
Bottom of the tank.
and that's why they put that tap on the bottom, so that you can drain that tank from the bottom and pull all that junk out of there.
So I use this as kind of a different story, but in one of our houses it's in a particular county in the state of Georgia, and they have a lot of water breaks all the time. And many times in this particular house, there's a lot. They actually have mud in the water. You can see it. And we talk about settling tanks. Where we see it the most in that particular house is in the toilet tank. So you end up with this layer of very fine mud, and because it's the toilet tank acts as a settling tank too. The water sits there for a long period of time, and it allows this stuff to settle to the bottom. And what we end up with is mud in the bottom of the tank. It's literally, you can put your finger down and you can write in it. It's really fine silt. So I say that's a municipal water system. So these are things that are not good for, the point being, these are things that are not good for your hot water heaters. So we want you just to be aware that you have to do this. So that you have to maintain your water system to give you the greatest length of life in your hot water system, right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So, John, if we're going to pick a hot water heating device, right? So we're talking about what choices do we have, and what do we need to think about, and what are the considerations?
Sure. The two that you're going to run up against generally, and we won't have to go off on all the very specifics and on the tangents here, but you're going to find the tank. This is the classic. I'm going to heat a bunch of water up, and I'm just going to hold it in a tank. And then when I need it, it's hot water right there. And then you've got the tankless. And tankless basically is on-demand hot water. There really is no tank, and you are just running water through a heated coil. So you got cooler water on one side, and out the other side comes hot water.
Yep.
And out to, your faucets and your shower and things like that. So those are really the two, and both of those can either be gas or electric. So those are the two types that most people are generally going to run up against.
There are some other types. There's geothermal, and there's some heat pump varieties, and there's some things that are, I don't want to call them exotic, but they're not common. Mm-hmm. Let's call it that. They're not as common as others. So, but we're going to stick this conversation strictly to pretty much what everybody has. 90% of the people have electric or gas, right? I mean, as a general rule. And gas can be propane or natural gas, either way. But they have electric or gas, and then we're going to talk about tankless or tanked hot water heaters, right? So I'm thinking about it. What do I need to be concerned with, John?
Well, I think what you need to look for is things like, how big is your house? How many people that you have living in your home? What kind of water consumption, hot water consumption that you really do? You have 5 kids taking, showers all the time. The teenagers that like to stay in the shower all the time. You're doing a lot of laundry. You're doing, washing dishes, all that kind of stuff. So there's the capacity consideration that you need to be pay attention to when you go and you replace or even get a new hot water type of device. So I think that's one of the things. And then there's other ratings on the tank about how fast it can keep up. I think it's got a first hour rating or something like that.
So
generally, what you're going to find is, on an average size house, let's say it's a 3,000 square, 5,000 square foot house, you might have a single 50-gallon tank, or you might even have two of them.
Right.
Okay.
So some of the other considerations too, we already touched on fuel type. So do you have gas or electric? Do you have gas or electric or something else? But usually we're going to this conversation gas or electric. And then also space, because in some homes, particularly in older homes, the size of the closet or the utilities area can be very small. So you do have to think about, like, how much size do you, or how much space do you have?
Yeah.
I actually have some of the older houses that were built in the 40s through the 60s. We actually have the hot water tanks under the houses, and we have to use short tanks because we don't have enough room to put a tall tank in there. And it just is, it's a consideration that you have to think about. So it's not always as simple as it seems. We did talk a little bit about capacity and water differential. So if you live in the north, just for example, if you live in a colder climate, you have a little bit different set of concerns than if you live in a southern climate, because there's what they call differential. And the differential is how cold is the water coming into the tank versus where you want it to go out. So if the water's coming in at 40 degrees, because you live in a cold climate, which is not uncommon for being in the cold climate, that the water comes in at 40 degrees and you want it to be 120 degrees going out, simple math tells us 40 minus 120 is 80 degrees differential, right? So it's 80 degrees in differential. Where here in the south, on a cold day, at least at my house in North Atlanta, probably the coldest the water's ever been coming out of the tap is about 55, maybe 60 degrees, John. I mean, I don't know what yours is, but it never gets much colder than that. And so, again, if you're going to 120 degrees and say it's 60 degrees, the differential's only 60 degrees versus 80. And that's a big difference. That's all energy, right? How much energy do you have to put into it? One of the other considerations is, are you replacing or is this new construction? So are you looking at a water heater for a new house, or are you looking at a water heater to replace one in an existing home, right? And there's some, obviously in new construction, you basically can do whatever you want, but there are some considerations particularly if you're going to change. So, and we'll get into a discussion on tankless in a bit, but if you're going to change from a tanked water heater to a tankless water heater, there's some considerations if you're doing that are different than if you're just replacing with what's there. And then lastly but not leastly, because we are always about saving you time, money, and aggravation, cost considerations, right, John? We've got to worry about, what are some of the considerations on cost? Because these things, can be expensive, or they can be. Tell us about tankless, John. What is a tankless water heater? And we're going to add in point-of-use water heater. So, folks, a point-of-use water heater is one. You know how some sinks have a little water heater underneath the sink, and they give you like really fast hot water? They call that point-of-use, but what that really is a super small tankless hot water heater.
And that's exactly right.
Yeah. So tell us about tankless.
Well, tankless is, how I described it, before. You put in cold water on one side, you heat all the coils up, and you run it through those coils, and out the other side comes hot water.
Hot water, yeah.
And you just alluded to the temperature differential, and this is the one thing where if you live in a very cold climate, is that you need to consider that if you want to put in a tankless, and they will tell you, they being the experts, the plumbers and that kind of thing, that you should get some. If you're going to go tankless, you need to get a gas one, because it's very hard to heat water quickly with electricity. And because of that differential, Larry, what you were just talking about is that it can be it's a struggle then for a tankless unit to heat that water up.
Yeah, to keep up. To keep up is what it is.
Right, to keep up with it as it's being used. So these are nice little units that you've seen. I'm sure folks out there, you probably see them. They're hanging on the wall. They've got, if they're gas, they're going to have to be vented to the outside like any other combustion type of product. And like I said, it's going to heat the coils up, and you run the water through those coils and out the other side, and it just keeps up. And that's why you don't need a tank, versus having to store let's say 50 gallons of hot water.
So just to be clear, tankless hot water heaters do come in electric varieties.
That's right.
They come in a wide variety of capacities. So I actually have a home that has one. It is a small one. It's a single bath house, and so it has a fairly small electric tankless hot water heater. And to date, it's worked fine. There are some concerns with it. Number one is I opened my breaker box on this particular house, and I saw hot water heater, and there were two 40-amp breakers, meaning it takes 80 amps of power to run electric power, 80 amps of electric power to run that. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a consideration. And I have a client that he just removed his tankless hot water heater. Now, he had a big home, much bigger home than this little single bath home, but he needed 120 amps of power to run his electric hot water heaters. I'll get into the story in a minute about why he replaced his tankless he went back to tanks. But I'll get into that in a minute. But I just want people to understand there's both gas and electric. Electric works better well below the frost line, if you want to call it that. So you really don't consider an electric hot water heater if you're north of where there's frost, for sure. And really, it's designed more for southern climes, warmer climes, I guess I'm going to say, dealing with the United States. But warmer climes is what it wants. It does, as we just said, a lot of power. Biggest advantage to tankless, one of the big advantages, I think anyway, is they do not need a lot of space. So these units are really quite small, and John just said they usually hang on the wall. And they're really, I don't know, John, how big's the biggest tankless hot water heater you've ever seen? Like a foot wide and maybe 2 feet tall, something like that, and 6 or 8 inches thick.
Yeah, that's
big.
a big
one. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, but they're that's about right versus the big barrel looking thing that you typically see in a closet or a basement somewhere.
Right. Exactly.
As a tank unit.
They are too, and we know this. They are much more efficient from the standpoint of energy usage. Over and over again, you'll find that your electric or gas bills, just depending on what you're using, will decrease if you install a tankless hot water heater. And, of course, we like that idea, except that cost, again, is as a consideration. Generally, tankless are more expensive on the front end. So the actual unit itself costs quite a bit more money than the traditional tank-style hot water heater. Is that true, John?
Yeah.
General rule of thumb.
Yeah.
When converting, this is all the research that I've done, and I've looked at these very often. So if you have a traditional hot water heater, if you have a gas hot water heater, the conversion is relatively simple because your gas line is there and your venting ductwork is there as well. If you're going from an electric hot water heater over to a gas-powered tankless hot water heater, the considerations are twofold. You're going to have a gas line supplied up into that room or wherever it is that you do that. That incurs a cost. There's that, and you're going to have venting that goes out of the house as well. And those two things, John, are they inexpensive or are they expensive?
No, it can be very expensive. I've heard of some real horror stories trying to do this, to tell you the truth. Not to go through them, but that's drilling through foundations and all kinds of things to get a vent, through there.
To get a vent and a gas line through as well.
So you can imagine how much that can start to cost.
Yeah, it starts to get pretty pricey. Now, in new construction, you have a blank slate. So at that point, if you're going to build a house or you're going to build an addition, either way, think about it from that standpoint. If you're doing a studs out remodel, it gets to be, then it's kind of like you have a blank canvas. So you can kind of those issues don't become as much of an issue. But if you're trying to retrofit one of these units in, and even if you go to the electric version, now you're going to have an electrician run in. 40 amps of power does not run over 14 gauge wire, right? It basically you're going to run like 6 gauge wire to power these things, and to give you perspective, that's wire that does not bend. like it's stiff and it's expensive. So it's not so much the expense, but actually running that, there's actually different things involved in running it. You're probably going to take drywall down to run that kind of wire. It just does not. It's not. You don't fish it through the wall. I've tried too. Trust me, it does not go where you want it to go. So these are some of the considerations if you're trying to do a conversion from tank to tankless. John, I guess we did some research and we found that just depending on even if you're doing it new, maybe it's less expensive to just put 2 tanked hot water heaters in.
Yeah, so I guess when you compare the two, I think you brought up some good points. One of them being is the space. If you don't have a whole lot of space, and then you might want to think about getting a tankless water unit. There are advantages to those things, like we talked about. But on the other side, though, the new technology in tank water heaters they are so efficient now that they once the water gets to temperature, they only lose about a degree. I think I heard a degree an hour, or a very very small loss of energy, if you will. So, and they're much cheaper in the long run. So there's this trade-off between these two technologies of heating water.
Yep, and I would say, it just depends. Like this particular house that I have this tankless hot water heater is one where you literally, there's not enough space to put a tanked water heater.
Yeah.
They had a tanked hot water heater. This is under the house. The house was built in 1943, and somebody dug that thing in there manually, right, to get it in there. I don't know. I mean, I would have to dig out an access port to get a hot water heater in there. So the previous owner put a tankless hot water heater in because I can tell you it was just dollars and cents. It was easier for him to run electric than it was to dig out underneath the house to get this hot water heater in there.
Absolutely. And can you imagine back in the day when they didn't have really a tankless type of technology, that you had to figure out how are you going to do this in a house that wasn't designed for a water heater? If it was back in the 1800s.
Well, this house, we looked at this house. I don't think it had. I'm not sure it had water when it was built. It was heated by coal.
That's my point.
Yeah, it was heated by coal through a chimney in the center of the house. That's how it was heated. You had central heating. It was called fire up a coal-fired stove.
Right in the middle of the house, and you get it scorching hot, and you just you regulate the heat by how close you sat to it,
and opening the windows.
You just scorch the heck out of everything, and then you move in and out of it. But I think Larry, if memory serves, is that you and I had worked on a house, I think somewhere where they had jammed a hot water heater in somewhere in a closet. I don't know if you remember that, and we built a door on it. Remember that?
I do remember that. Yes, it was very difficult. Oh, they built 2 doors on it, actually.
Yeah, and I'm quite surprised, and I've run across this before, is that the code being is that you can't – it's a combustible device, such as a furnace, where you were burning. Now, I can't remember if that was an electric one or gas. That was like –
It was gas.
It was gas.
Yep.
And that's if something like that is in and I'm just saying this because, if people are out there and there's not a whole lot of room and you're trying to, jam one of these things in somewhere, you got to watch out for code because they can't really be in a livable type of space.
Right.
Because of the carbon monoxide and the dangers of that. But I do remember the time we were working on that house where that thing was in the closet, and quite frankly, I don't even know how they got it in there.
They built it around it, and getting it out was going to be a nightmare. I mean, a complete nightmare.
Exactly. So that's another thing. And when you're looking at this and you're looking to put one in, now they have to be on a little stand. They have to be so high off the ground now, and there's a lot of code, to these things.
So speaking of code, new hot water heaters, new tanked hot water heaters have to have an expansion tank on them, right?
Yeah, an expansion tank. Yes.
And so this is it's not really new technology, but it's for those of us that are old or older or dealing with older houses, you might not have an expansion tank on your hot water heater.
Right.
And let's explain what an expansion tank is and what does it do.
Yeah, we take a step back here, physics-wise. When you heat water, it's going to expand. It's going to expand a little bit, and it's going to contract as it cools. And so there's going to be this motion that's if you want, it's kind of like hypertension. It's going to expand, and then it's going to contract. It's going to relax, and then it's going to get. So if you're taking a shower, for instance, you're going to start to drain some water out of there. Then the thing's going to have to regenerate. So it's going to start to get cooler. Then all of a sudden it's going to get hotter. And as that goes up and down, that pressure is felt throughout all the plumbing in the pipes. And what this expansion tank does is it relieves that problem by taking all that movement, if you will, that I'm describing and putting it into that tank. It's got a bladder and air in there so that the water can go in there, the overflow a little bit, and it just moves it back and forth so that you don't have this flexing with your plumbing. So it really is there to save your plumbing. That's the bottom line.
Right.
Now, it used to be where those things, before we had what's known as a closed system, which is that you cannot get to your city water system through your own house anymore backwards. Because we all have PRV valves, the pressure relief valves in our homes and things like that now, where that used to never be a problem because the city water would absorb this, what I'm describing as this expansion and contraction. If you think about it, it would go all the way back, Okay. So there was some concerns about all kinds of sanitation and things like that. And then we have the closed system, which we have now, which everything kind of stays within your home after that PRV valve. And that's what this thing does. It saves your plumbing. So I brought this up earlier when we were talking about this is that, one of the things that you will find, and Larry, you just alluded to it. So if you're going to have your water heater, a tank water heater changed out, and you don't have one of these things, and they look like a small propane tank, and that's going to sit like on top, and you'll say, wait a minute, what the heck is that thing? So don't be surprised when you see that, and that is code these days.
Yes. And so that's called an expansion tank, and that'll be on both gas and electric tanked hot water heaters. And again, it's actually there to protect your plumbing. It just kind of is. It takes up pretty modest space. Generally, they're usually mounted vertically. Sometimes they're attached to a wall. They're not really very heavy, so they don't necessarily have to be attached to anything, but they should probably be up against something just so they don't break the pipes. And it just depends on the types of piping that you have too. If they're put on a copper, they generally don't do anything. They're just up there. And then if they're on PEX, they're usually attached to something. So not a big deal, but just something to be aware of, right? If you go, what is an expansion tank?
Yeah, what is that?
What is it and what's it do? Well, it's basically just a bladder that moves up and down. It's just like a piston, and it just keeps the pressure regulated in your pipes is what it does. Do it on heating and cooling, contraction, and expansion. So, anything else on water heaters, John? Have we talked pretty much about everything?
Yeah, I mean that's it. One of the things that you're going to find out there is that you just need to know what the age of it is. They're all stamped with their date of birth, I guess, on them. They're all there. So you can look at how old it is, and just really, it's important to do a very close inspection of these things. You just don't want to get caught off guard with an older unit that's about ready to go. And I will tell you that the new ones are very efficient. And yeah, I mean, they can all this this money, but it's not that bad when you think about that. This is one of the bigger utilities that you really pay for is creating hot water within your house.
It's second in most homes.
It's
second
exactly.
in most homes. So behind the air, heating and cooling the air. So it's the second biggest energy consumption in your home. And it is something that you'll use, every single day, multiple times per day. And with an average life expectancy in excess of 10 years, when you look at it and you amortize it out over a yearly basis, you really don't pay that much for them. I mean, comparatively.
That's right.
And it is something that's definitely a what do we call it? The quality of life issue, right? Having hot water, at least to me, is really important. I like hot showers. Yeah. I don't like
you're taking your share of cold showers,
I'm
sure.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's a different reason, John. But anyway. Anyway, so we just want to bring out our goal here was just to bring out some of the differences between a tankless and a tanked, and then a little bit of the difference between electric and gas. And I guess John, one thing we never really described is how does an electric hot water heater heat the water? Well, the short answer is there's generally 2 electrodes, could be 1, but sometimes 2. It can be more than that too. But generally, it's 2 electrodes. They're just heating elements. They stick through the side of the hot water heater into the tank. Electric current runs through it. It heats up that element. That, in turn, heats the water up. And lo and behold, you have hot water. Those 2 elements do have a lifespan, and they do tend to go bad. And it's a very simple repair if you have an electric hot water tank. If it stops working before its allotted time, that you can replace the elements. It's pretty simple repair. It's to basically turn the power off. It's 2 wires, take the thing out, put the new one in. You're good to go. Pretty simple. But that we never did discuss that, but that's how an electric hot water heater heats a traditional tank hot water, heats the water. So pretty simple, pretty good, pretty tested technology. John, when did the first hot water heaters came out? When? Probably in the 20s, I guess?
I don't know. The Egyptians?
Well, I mean, the original hot water tank was a cast iron pot with a bulb, filled with water over a fire, as John said.
Right.
That's really the first hot water heater.
That's my go-to answer. Egyptians.
The Egyptians. The Romans.
They
the Romans
did it first.
Yeah, the Romans did it first.
They did it.
So anyway, it's good. John, you know what? John, there's a spaceship landing.
Yes.
What do we do?
I don't know, but he didn't have much room, so he was tankless.
So he's a tankless hot water heater. In his spaceship, he's tankless. How do you know that, John? Did you take that spaceship apart?
I did. I couldn't sell him a tanked one.
Yep, there you go. Folks, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please send us an email, questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. You can go to our website and leave us a message. We are on Facebook at Handyman Pros. You can follow us on Twitter at Handyman Radio. Love it. We will talk to you next week. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this podcast and have derived some value from it, here's 4 things you can do. 1, tell your friends about this podcast. 2, hit subscribe on your podcast player. While you're there, leave us a review. 3, subscribe to our newsletter by going to handymanprosradioshow.com and click on the subscribe button. We'll inform you of upcoming events, shows, and give you actionable tips for maintaining your home and property. And 4, send us an email with your questions to questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. That's handymanprosradioshow.com. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.